went to the door, and it had a couple of those chain locks on it, you know. I just cracked it with the chain still on, and it was the U.S. Marshals Violent Offender Task Force. And they said, let us in, we need to talk. And I said, not unless you got a warrant. The dude said, man, in 5 seconds, I'm coming through this door, whether you want me to or not. And I shut the door back, and I told the lady, I said, you might as well save your door and let them people in.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
What's up, Brandon? How's it going?
Oh, man, it's going good. How are you today?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for joining me on such short notice. I think we only connected, was it like on Monday, and here we are today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had a recent guest, Nicole Victorious.
Right.
That is your wife. And after that
Yes.
conversation I had with her, I said, well, it sounds like your husband's got a story to tell. And now here we are, like 4 days later. Like, let's jump in. How did this get started for you? Now, it typically people say, oh, it started when I was a kid, it started when I was 12 or 13, but that's not the case for you, is it?
No, it's not. I grew up. I just jump right in. I grew up in a spirit-filled home, a Christian home. I didn't have any reason or any influence that would have led me down this path. And so for me to end up where I did was odd. But for me, it happened at the age of, I guess, 23 or so, 24. I got married young to my first wife, and she wasn't a bad person. That never was really a productive relationship. I did have 3 daughters out of it, but we just weren't good for each other. And so uh, I was a police officer for 3 years. I worked in narcotics. I started a street interdiction and narcotics team in a small town near here, that I worked for. But that came to an end. My wife just one night we went to bed, and just like every other night, it was I love you, a kiss, good night, whatever. And at that moment in time, I had taken a job working offshore. And while I was going offshore, she had sat down and put a whole lot of thought into a 3-page letter that she was going to leave me, to explain that she didn't want to be together anymore. And what she had done was, after I fell asleep, she went and hung it on the refrigerator. I read that letter, and it I could tell by what she had put in there that a lot of thought had gone into it. It wasn't just something that she just spur of the moment came to. So that, in combination with the fact that she said in the letter that she didn't love me anymore, I I just realized that it wasn't something that I needed to fight over. And I moved out, and I moved in with some friends of mine, actually less than a mile down the road. Now, up until this point in my life, I had only ever drank, and it never was consistent. It was every now and then we'd go to the bar or something, and whatever. But I had never been tempted by drugs, even thought about drugs. I mean, knew people that did them, but I had no desire for it whatsoever. And I've always told people that the night that I used meth for the first time was is just the perfect storm. It was a combination of all of the perfect events that had to line up in order for that to happen. And I was depressed and down and out and drinking every weekend, and went out one night and got drunk, and somebody had offered me an Oxycontin, and I took it, and that didn't do anything but make it worse. So I was real belligerent and stumbling, and just nobody wanted to be around me. So my best friend was like, come here, man, I'm going to the bathroom, I'm gonna get you straight. Went in the bathroom, and he put a line out on the counter and said, here, snort that line and that'll straighten you up some. And so I didn't even know what it was, but I was just messed up. And so I did it. I snorted it, and I'll never forget that, because
I'm sure you
a lot
won't.
of people,
Meth burns, man.
a lot of people say they never forget the first time they use
Yeah.
for because of how it impacted the rest of their life, but I'll never forget it because of what happened in that specific moment.
Mm.
In that moment, not only did it burn and I felt like it blew the back of my head off, but um, before I made it out the bathroom door, it seemed like everything in my life had become clear. Unbeknownst to me, that the come down was equally as bad. And
Mm.
so the following probably 12 hours later, because that was the first time I used meth, it lasted a long time. I found myself curled up in a recliner with the people that I stayed with, my friends, telling me, trying to calm me down because I was crying and wanting to die. And because I was just crashing, coming down off the meth and back to reality. And the same person, my buddy, he said, "Here, man, if you do a little bit more, it'll level you out and you'll feel fine." And that was, so that's kind of how it got started. I overnight it spiraled into just a constant thing.
Now you quit policing before this happened?
That's actually a funny story how that came to an end. I loved being a police officer. I was a post certified officer. I worked for three different police departments around in our area. And at this point in time, I was not working full time anywhere. At this point in time, I was working offshore,
Mm.
but I was still a post certified police officer, and I would go in and I would work a little bit here and there for these three different departments. And so my buddy called me up and he said, "Hey, you want to come out and ride with me tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." So it wound up we wanted to go to a strip club. So we went to this strip club, and uh, these two strippers came back to his apartment with us, and we just partied with them. And it got wild and got crazy, and these girls were putting on our uniforms and stuff, and so we were really cutting up, and he was like, "Hey man, we got to take some pictures of this." And back then, that was before, this was back in 2001. There wasn't no cell phone cameras and stuff like that, or there was, but we didn't have them. But anyway, the only camera that I could think of was the one that was in our police unit outside, and it was the department camera that we used for, documenting crimes and evidence. And so I went out there and I got that camera, and that was back when it was 8 millimeter. I mean, not 8 millimeter. It had the rolls of film. And I went out there and I got the camera and came in, and it took a crap ton of pictures, half a roll of pictures of these girls and us with these girls and doing all sorts of stuff. And so, um, and then put it back in the police car and forgot about it. And when that roll of film finished being used, they the camera was taken to Walmart to develop the film. And when they started coming out of the print at Walmart, they called the manager, and the manager called the police department and was like, "We have photos of cops doing stuff with two women," and it was bad. Now, when the police chief showed up at my house, he said, "Look, man," he said, "I want you to understand you've always been a good officer." He said, "And you have not done anything illegal. There's nothing illegal about this. But the fact that it got out to the public and there's pictures of it that they've seen, they want somebody to somebody's head's got to roll. So the best thing for you to do is resign." And so that's how it came to an end.
Mm.
It moved really fast. Uh, I met somebody else that used, and then met somebody else that used, and then before you know it, I've always had an outgoing personality. So before you know it, I was kind of bouncing around in every circle in town where anybody did meth, and I was meeting. Within a couple of months, I knew 100 or more people that used.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day a girl called me up and she said, "Hey, look," she said, and they back then they referred to it as like the organization or something. I don't remember, but she was like, "You want a spot's come open?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, so and so got arrested, and now." Uh, the person that he was selling dope for is looking for somebody that can sell, and I know you know a lot of people. Do you want to do it? And I said, yeah, why not? And within, like I said, the first couple of months, I was sitting across the desk from the biggest meth dealer in our area at that time back then. And this was back in 2002, 2001 or two, and this guy had a 5 gallon bucket full of meth next to his desk. We're talking about big back then. That was a lot. And he said, "Look, man," he said, "I got one rule. If you ever screw me over, I'll kill you, and that's it." And I kind of that was kind of the day that I sold my soul to the devil, so to speak, the first time. And it really quickly became a situation where I was not nearly as addicted to the meth as I was addicted to the lifestyle that came with it.
Mm.
But regardless, it took off, and that became my life for the next 5 years.
Where did that thought pattern shift to where it's okay to do these things? Because I mean, you weren't around these things growing up. How did it become okay?
Right. I don't I don't think it ever did.
Mm.
I was hiding it from day one. I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing it. I knew it was. I was raised differently than that, and that feeling only got progressively worse, and then the feelings are only exacerbated by the fact that I was away from my kids and I was missing things and events, and I was avoiding family because I knew I couldn't bring drugs to my parents' house or to family functions and stuff. So I was avoiding everything, and
Mm.
I knew that. But I knew all along because of how I was raised that what I was doing just wasn't right. Then it became something. With meth, I lost so much weight, and it became something where they knew something was going on, and then their arrests started taking happening. I started getting arrested, and that whole cycle. I mean, I've been arrested 32 times, and
By people that you once worked with?
that I once worked with. I became once that first interaction with the police took place. I became Overnight. I became the most wanted around here because of the fact that I used to be one of them, and it really pissed them off that that I was going down this road, but B, that I was using everything that I had learned in law enforcement to keep law enforcement off my back. Every time they had an opportunity to stop me or to pull me over or to put me in handcuffs, they did. And I was an arrogant prick too
No.
about it. I was out in the open with it and acting dumb with it, and they didn't like that. They hated that. That
Mm-hmm.
they were having to work 12 hours a day, and I was out just running the roads and getting laid.
Mm.
And my wife said I'm still arrogant. Uh,
So were there ever any is there any experiences that you have that stand out in your mind that were like extraordinarily dangerous or extraordinarily like you shouldn't have walked away from that?
yeah, I've had several. One of them should have been a situation where I spent the rest of my life in jail, and the other one should have been a situation where I was dead. I'll tell
Mm.
you about those two because they're the most prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the first one was I I had a crotch rocket, and I had the guy that I was selling drugs for back then. He had this thing going where like he was a really big meth dealer in the central Louisiana area at that time, and he was buying and selling meth all over a 5 state area. And and but what he would do is for people right here in our hometown that were selling meth, well, he didn't want them going to him to buy it. He would have it sent to Dallas, and then have someone from Dallas bring it back here to make it look like it was coming from Dallas and
Mm.
not coming from here. And I got the phone call one day, and he asked me if I would carry a pound of meth to Dallas for him on my crotch rocket. And at that point in time in my life, I was so just spun out that I didn't care. Yeah, sure, give it to me. So he gives me the drugs, and I put them under the seat of the crotch rocket. And I was coming back from the little town out where he lives, and I was fixing to get on the interstate, and I passed a state trooper that was pulled over on the side of the road. And when I went by him, I was speeding, and I seen him. I seen the brake lights come on, and I knew that he was fixing to turn around. So I just got on it, and I took off and went over a bridge, and I was fixing to make the. It's an on ramp that gets up on the interstate, and it's a pretty sharp curve, and it's going up an incline, and I hit that curve, and I was way too far on the outside for that bike, and I had it leaned over as far as I could go, and I knew that I could tell that I was going to hit the handrail if I didn't do something. So I just stood the bike up and went straight off the back of this ramp, and and actually landed it. And when I landed it, I'm headed for the cement pilings of the interstate in front of me. I said, "Well, I gotta lay it down." And when I laid it down, it caught and flipped and slammed me to the ground, man. And just I remember sliding forever, and I slid all the way up to that cement embankment. And when I stopped, I was laying there, and I just started moving my hands, moving my ankles, feet, my neck, seeing if anything was broken. And fortunately, nothing. I didn't have any injuries, but I had a bad concussion. I had a helmet on. I had a bad concussion to the point that I got up and I was trying to get on the bike to ride it off, not
Mm.
knowing, not finding out till way later that the bike, the front and back wheels were touching, like they had folded the bike in half, and I didn't even know it was plastic strode everywhere. And but whenever I came to a stop, I remember seeing that cop fly by, boom, going looking for me. He just went straight past me. Never saw where it was. So I found my phone, and I went through the phone book on it several times before I even recognized any of the names. Like I had hit my head hard. And so I finally came to enough to call my roommate at the time, a buddy of mine that was staying with me. I said, "Man, you got to come pick me up. I just wrecked. I got in a wreck. Come get me." And he came and he pulled over on the side of the road, and we jumped in the truck and took off. Left everything out there. And when we came back by an hour or two later, man, there was cops and ambulances, fire trucks, all kind of stuff, and they were out there with a bunch of them, like holding hands, walking, looking for a body. They said there's no way somebody lived through this because
Mm.
that bike was destroyed. Another instance was something that was should have put me in jail forever, or could have. I was dating a girl, and I came home one night, and I caught her in bed with my best friend, and I flashed out, and I snatched her up naked and drug her outside and stuck her in the trunk of the car
Mm.
and took off out to the woods, and got out to the middle of the woods at night and pulled her out of the trunk. And I had a 9 millimeter, and I put it up to her head, and I pulled the trigger, and it went click,
Mm.
and I threw a pillowcase at her and got in the car and drove off and left her out there. And it wasn't, like I said, until I was on my way back into town that I realized that I had just tried to kill that girl. And
Wow.
and I the gun just malfunctioned. The motorcycle accident didn't get my attention enough to make me quit, but it did make me realize that God had his hand on me. But in this situation, I realized that I felt like God seriously had his hand on me, because that should have ruined my life and somebody else's life and a whole bunch of other people in the meantime. My 12 or 13 years of meth addiction is broken up into two sections. That was the first section period, and I went on for about 4 years dealing meth and using, and just everything wide open. About 8 months before that round came to an end, I was at a party one night with the two girls the girl I was dating and one of her friends, and everybody had left. And I was laying in the room, and I heard them in the living room, whispering this and that. So I got up and go in there and see what was going on. And they were trying to shoot up, and neither one of them had ever done it. Well, I had been around so many people so much that did it. Um, I was trying to be cool, and I was like, man, let me show y'all how to do that. And so I took it, and I just got it all set up, and I shot up for the first time. And it instantly changed everything. Up until that point, I had spent 4 years either snorting or smoking or eating meth.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I put that needle in my arm, none of those other ways were effective anymore. Um, and I got hooked on the needle, man, and that went for 8 months. In 8 months' time, everything that I had done and built or accumulated over the last 4 years, I lost. Everything I owned was in a backpack, and I was walking the streets with nowhere to go, but I still had a connection. And um, I was walking down the road one night, late, middle of the night, and I went up to a buddy of mine's house, someone that was a serious user, someone that would never turn down drugs. I mean, just and he was somebody I had known for a long time that we didn't have any issues. And I knocked on his door, and he come to the door, man. And I said, "Look, dude, I got some dope. I just need a shower, man. Just let me get a shower and clean up, and I'll hook you up." He was like, "Nah, man, you can't come in here, man. I don't. I'm good. Don't even, And he turned me away. And at that point in time, I realized that that was it. Like that, I had hit the absolute bottom. People that I knew wouldn't turn down drugs for nothing, wouldn't even take free dope to let me get a shower. And I knew that at that point that it couldn't get any worse than that. So I left his house, and I walked a couple of blocks up the road to our Coliseum here where they have events. And I remember they were having construction there, and there was a big pile of rocks in the back. And I went and sat on those rocks, and I called my mom, and I said, "Look," I said, "I need help." I said, I'm gonna die out here because I'm done." And she said, "Well, I'll send somebody to get you." And she sent a friend of ours that was a preacher at the time, and he came and picked me up, and they drove me to down to South Louisiana, about 3 hours away from here, to another friend of ours that is a pastor of a church down there, and dropped me off. And that pastor let me have a room in his house, and basically that's how I got clean. I just stayed
Mm-hmm.
down there. He let me clean around the church and keep his yard up and stuff like that, and I just stayed with him, uh, uh, and sobered up. And uh, what what I had decided was that I was going to stay with him and stay out of Alexandria until I had gone one full week without getting any phone calls or text messages from anybody from that life, until all of that went away. And I stopped responding to him. I stopped answering anything. And I said, I'm going to set my phone here until it stops going off for a full week and people have stopped thinking about me, then I'm going to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out to be about 2.5 or 3 months I stayed down there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and before my phone stopped. And finally, once I had felt like um, I wasn't going to be getting any more phone calls and text messages, I packed up and came back home.
Mm-hmm.
And I just stayed away from all the people, places, and things and started my life over again. But whenever I came back to Alexandria is when I met my second wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another whole debacle in itself. That was someone else that I probably didn't need to be with. And I met her. We went out on our first date, and I got her pregnant the first night we went out. That marriage wasn't much different than the first one. It was toxic. I stayed sober for probably 4 years of it. We got married. I went to work back offshore. Just had a normal functioning life. No drugs whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, whenever I'd be come in from offshore, me and my wife would have a few drinks and barbecue or whatever. But there wasn't no kind of drug activity at all on my part. But she was doing some other things,
Mm-hmm.
um, and addiction was there, but I was clean and sober, and I stayed that way for the majority of that relationship. And then back in 2013, there was a huge upset in the oil field, and 30,000 people across the Gulf of Mexico got laid off, and I was one of them.
Mm.
And I got laid off, so I'm sitting at home. I got two kids, and I'm married, and now all of a sudden I don't have a job. And so I start looking for work. Well, working in the oil field, you make a lot of money, and back then in 2013, I was making about $95,000 a year, which was really good at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just could not find anything locally that was going to pay me even remotely that amount of money. And so I started losing stuff. They done a repo to a camper that I had, and they wanting to repo my truck, and everything's going south. I'm losing everything. I can't find work. I remember one night I just went to my second wife, and I had not hid anything about my past from her. She knew everything about my past. And I went to her one night and I said, "Look, I know how I can make some money to get us out of this bind." Um, I know still know a lot of people that do meth, and I'm sure I can find somebody to get some from, and I could sell it. And I'm not going to use it. I have no desire to use it or whatever. And she said, "Well, if you think that'll work, then let's do it." So we spent that evening, and I gave her what I would say was Meth 101. Told her everything about it and what it does and how it works, and how to hide it, and just everything I could think of to tell her, to educate her on it. I told her, and went to town, and found a buddy of mine and say, "Look, man, I'm gonna get back. I'm trying to get back in the game. Front me an ounce." And he said, "All right." So he gave me an ounce, and the rest was history. I was right back at it, but I was committed to only dealing it and not using, and I stuck with that commitment all the way to the next day. And then I really actually I justified it by saying, "How in the world am I going to sell this to anybody and tell them it's the best if I don't know it is?
Oh,
I
that
need to
makes
try it every
sense. That
time. So I
makes sense.
gotta try it."
Got to do it.
I was immediately back on it and using, and it was wide open. And but still, at that point in time, I'm still remaining true to the person that I've always been. I was still a good guy. I was still honest and as upstanding as a meth dealer can be. I was still with my wife, and I had kids, and I I had as much morals as a meth dealing addict could have. And so that went on for about 2 years. Me and her together just selling
She's
dope.
using
And
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
she started using too. And so it just, that right there, that spiral, it went right down the same road, spiraled out of hand, and just got way bigger than it needed to be. And then we were staying at a girl's house, and I'll tell you this story. We were staying at a girl's house, and I had 7 grams in my pocket, in a pair of cargo pants in the side pocket. And me and her had our own room at this house, and went in there, and I laid down across the bed, and I fell asleep for a little bit. And when I woke up, she was laying next to me. I woke up because someone called and wanting some dope. And I reached in my pocket to see what I had, and I couldn't find it. It wasn't there. And there was about 10 people that were in the house at the time. And I woke her up and I said, "Look, my dope is gone. Where's my dope?" And oh man, she jumped up and started helping me look for it. And I couldn't find it. And I go in the living room and I get everybody in the house. I got them in the living room. I got them at gunpoint. I'm making them strip all their clothes off and to search them for drugs. I done took everybody's cell phones and I'm holding this whole place hostage trying to find this drugs. And and unbeknownst to me, one of the girls that was in the living room had another cell phone. And she texted her mom while this was going on and told her mom that they were being held hostage. And her mom called the police and sent them to that house.
Hmm.
And while I'm in the middle of all this, got people half dressed and whatnot, I see a couple of sheriff's department trucks pull up out front. And when they pulled up on the road out front, I knew somebody had called. So I bailed out the back door and I ran through the woods behind the house. And it just freak coincidence. As I'm coming out the woods to the highway, a friend of mine that I knew was passing by and he saw me and pulled over and I jumped in the car with him and hauled butt. After it calmed down over there that night and the cops had all left, I went back over to that house and my wife was gone. And my truck was still there. And so I was confused as to what was going on, and I started calling her and calling her and calling her, and no answer and whatnot. And the girl whose house we were at said, "Hey, look, she left." And I said, "I know she left. She's not, you know." She said, "No, she left. Like she doesn't want to be with you anymore. She packed all her stuff and left." And so I went on this whole rampage there, going to everybody we knew's house and kicking their door open and looking in all their closets, trying to find my wife and stuff.
You were a
And the way it had
dangerous
turned out
guy.
was, well, I had that experience from law enforcement, and I had that wildness about me, and that I wasn't afraid of nothing.
Hmm.
And so I went on this rampage. I went to probably 8 or 9 people's houses, and I wasn't asking questions. I pull up in the driveway and kicked the door open and went through there. "Where's my wife at? Y'all are hiding her." And I was spun out too, and I couldn't find her anywhere. And when it was all said and done, I found out that she is the one who took the dope
Hmm.
that she was helping me look for, and she went and sold it to finance her getting a hotel room to hide out and stay away from to keep me away from her. And she had been hooking up with the guy that I one of the guys that I was dealing with dope. I kind of just went off the deep end. I mean, I went wide open. I was trying to deal as much dope as I could, to as many people as I could, and staying high as I could. And um, and somebody called me and said, "Hey, you need to come over to so and so's house. They got some people over here that want some. If you come over here and just hang out, you can probably get off of some while you're here." So I packed up and I drove over there. And I don't know if it was a setup. I don't know what the deal was, but um, I got over there and we was hanging out, and I had 78 grams of meth on me. I needed to go get something out of the car, and I told my buddy, I said, "Let me have the keys. I'm gonna run out to the car." And he gave me the keys, and I went outside. I looked down the road and I seen 2 unmarked police units sitting parked in the middle of the road side by side facing our direction. And I said, "That ain't no coincidence. So I took the dope that was on me and I stuck it in the car, threw it in there on the floorboard without them being able to see it. And I shut the door and locked it. And I went back inside. And when I went inside, I told the lady whose house it was, I said, "Man, I don't know what's going on." I said, "There's 2 unmarked units parked down the road." And sure enough, it wasn't a couple of minutes went by. They were banging on the door. And I went to the door and it had a couple of those chain locks on it. I just cracked it with the chain still on. And there was about 8 or 9 U.S. Marshals outside. It was the U.S. Marshals Violent Offender Task Force. And they said, "Let us in. We need to talk." And I said, "Not unless you got a warrant." The dude said, "Man, F your warrant. In 5 seconds, I'm coming through this door, whether you want me to or not. And I shut the door back and I told the lady, I said, you might as well save your door and let them people in. And so I went and in the first bedroom, I jumped in there and I laid across the top of the bed, just straight, hands on my side, legs out straight, just laying there to where when they came in, they knew that I was not resisting because I knew they were coming in. And she went over there and she opened up the door, and man, they came through that house like just like they were looking for murderers. I'm talking about coming through hollering, clear, clear, and just throwing people and whatnot. And they came into that room that I was in. And like I said, I was laying on the bed. I said, I'm not resisting. I hollered it like that. And that dude busted me in the head right here. Broke my orbital socket with the butt of that shotgun.
Hmm.
Pow! And so they drugged me outside, and they arrested me. They charged me with 78. I had 78 grams of meth on me, and I had $7,000 cash, and and the paraphernalia and stuff. They charged me with, but they also charged me with manufacturing and trafficking.
Hmm.
And whenever they hit me with those two charges, I immediately knew who had talked to him, because there was only two females in this whole world that knew that I had manufactured meth and that knew that I had traveled across state lines with meth.
Hmm.
And so I knew that I had been ratted out. And but anyway, I sat in jail. They put me in jail.
Okay, let's take a quick break and I will read off today's sponsors. EHN Canada is Canada's leading provider of mental health and addiction services, providing evidence-based and medically assisted care with 1-year wraparound services for those suffering from substance use disorder. To learn more, find their link in the show notes below. Métis Nation Saskatchewan has announced its path for the pursuit of self-government. As an MNS citizen, I am proud to see my government fight to protect my rights. This is our moment. To learn more about the treaty and our path to self-government, go to ourmoment.ca. Pine Lodge, the treatment center I went to 7 years ago when I got sober, offers inpatient addictions treatment and aftercare programming in Regina, Saskatchewan. To inquire about services or make a donation, call 306-510-1891. Wellness News, Choice for Healthy Living, is a local resource that works to connect people to health and wellness-related products, services, and expert advice from industry professionals, locally allowing us to connect and engage. Check out wellnessnews.ca or skwellnesshub.ca today to learn more. To make contact or to learn more about today's sponsors, to check out our new merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are also in the show notes below. Okay, what was it like? What brought you in?
Well, I got that arrest was the final straw. I knew that at that point in time that those charges were going to put me in jail for a long time. I think it would have been like 35 years with the trafficking and the manufacturing charges. Um, but they put me in jail, and I spent 86 days in the Rapides Parish Detention Center, um, awaiting arraignment. And during that time, I was, naturally I got sober, but I begged my family, you got to get me some help. You got to get me some help. I don't have any other major charges. I'll agree to go to rehab or anything that I can do to get some help. Well, my mom at the time was close with one of our assistant district attorneys, the actual one that was going to be prosecuting me. And he made me an offer. He said, "Look, here's the deal." He said, if you will go and complete a year-long faith-based rehab, I will table these charges. And if you complete the rehab and you come back and you do right, act right, then we'll make them go away." And I said, "Okay, done." So that started my journey into recovery. They sent me to a long term rehab, and I stayed there for 2 months. And after 2 months of being there, I got kicked out. Somebody else that had was in the program had going on a pass or whatever, and came back and brought some Xanax, and he was telling people about it, and I just so happened to be one of those people he told, and I didn't tell on him. And whenever they decided they were going to throw people out, they threw everybody that knew about it out. And so I'm 2 months into this year-long rehab, and boom, they have me picked up by the police, and I'm back in the Rapides Parish Jail. And I said, man, they're never going to give me another chance. I'm done. I didn't run that chance. And I talked to my family, and I told them what all happened. Well, um, the assistant or the warden, the guy who's over the sheriff's department here at the time, that determines whether someone can go do that kind of thing or not. He said, "I tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. I'm gonna call the treatment place that you were at, and if they tell me that what you're telling me happened is the truth, then I'll give you a chance to go to a different place." And so he did. He got him on the phone. They said, "Yeah, no, he wasn't using. He the guy that did, and he confirmed my story." So he got off the phone. He said, "All right, man." He said, "They said you was telling the truth, so we're gonna give you another chance." So they found another place for me to go to, and that's where I finished up the year.
Mm,
And that was the place that uh, pretty much changed my life, and is the reason why I'm where I'm at today. Um, it was a absolutely horrible place. 90% of the people that were there on court order, and I watched a many of them walk out the gates to leave because they would rather be in jail than where we were at. It was a
mm,
miserable experience, but it was a very, very necessary experience in my life. It humbled me, and you weren't allowed to have anything but a notebook, a pen, and a Bible. And he would have a couple of classes during the week, maybe 2 hours worth of classes a week total. And that was it, rehab based. One of those classes was a cognitive behavioral therapy class, and one of those classes was just like a it was a it's a faith based recovery program that is the at the time was the only faith based program our syllabus that was acknowledged or approved by the U.S. government, and it's called Therapon. All the rest of the time there was downtime,
mm,
downtime in which you didn't have anything but a pen, paper, and a Bible. You weren't allowed to do anything. You couldn't exercise. You couldn't play. You couldn't cut up. You couldn't do nothing but read your Bible or sit outside and smoke cigarettes. That was it. Everything that you had or knew was stripped away from you. You couldn't call people. You couldn't. I mean, nothing. It was in. And on Sundays, your family could come and go to church at their church there, and you could have a visit with them for an hour afterwards, and that was it. And it was very, very humbling. But it was
mm,
during that time that I sought out God for myself for the first time in my life. And while I was in this place is whenever the first time I ever really got on my knees and said, "Look, God, I want to know you personally. I want to know you on a personal level, and I want to rededicate my life to you. And if you will help me get through this situation, I promise you that I will spend the rest of my life doing whatever you want me to do." And
mm,
at the time, I was dealing with a tremendous amount of guilt and a tremendous amount of shame over everything that had gone on in my life in the past. And I just couldn't get over that. I couldn't read my Bible. I couldn't pray. I couldn't do anything because every time I would start to do it, I would start getting these memories and these images and just drugs and the women and the what, just whatever. And it was holding me back. And, I was praying, and I was repenting and asking God to forgive me for all that stuff and begging him to take this misery that I was going through away from me, these memories and thoughts and stuff. And one day, as plain as me and you were talking, he told me, he said, "If you'll get out a notebook and paper and you will write down, start at the day you used the first time, and you will write down every single thing that you can possibly remember throughout all those years, it'll I'll take that away from you." And that's what I did. I spent about 2 weeks writing. Started at the very beginning, and I wrote every story I could remember, every feeling I could remember. I wrote it all down in this notebook, and I closed that notebook and put it in my locker. And as soon as I did that, I never had another thought or desire or memory or none of that. Just, it was gone instantly. And um, about a week later, I was praying, and the second time I felt like God spoke to me, said, "You need to get that notebook out and you need to send it home with your mom and dad so they'll know the truth about everything you've been lying about for the last however many years."
Mm.
And man, that was a hard one to choke down, because in order for me, this, and you got to understand that these are things that I was doing on my own. They weren't things that this rehab was telling me I should do. They were
Mm-hmm.
things that I was doing on my own to try to fix these problems in my life. And believe it or not, me writing in that book, that turned out to be one of the steps. You know, I was sitting there uh, making a list of all the things that I had done, and but I was really transparent on the pages of that notebook. But I felt like I needed to send it to my family, and I did. I sent it home with them, and after the brunt of it and whatnot, and they had settled down over it, my mom asked me one day if she could let somebody else read it, and that what I wrote in rehab is what turned out to be published. That is my book that I have published now.
Mm.
And then I got out, and I just started my life over again. Um, Went and got a job, got me a place to an apartment, and I told my dad. I said, "Dad, while I was in that rehab, I feel like God told me that I need to work with addicts, that I need to help other people go, down this path, a path to deliverance." And I said, "But I want to know everything there is to know on a addiction treatment or recovery basis." I said, "So I want to go to this school in Baton Rouge for substance abuse counseling." And he said, "All right." He said, "If you'll go to it, I'll pay for it." So he paid the $2,000 for me to go to the class. And after the year, I graduated. But during that year of class, learning everything from a clinical standpoint that they want you to know to be a substance abuse counselor, and what the clinical idea is of recovery, I realized that a significant amount of it was contradictory to what I felt like um, the Bible said about anything, for that
Mm-hmm.
matter. And so I said, if I want to pursue this any further and get my license to be a licensed therapist, then there's going to be certain things that I believe a person has to do or has to have uh, interaction that an addict has to have from a counselor or from somebody who's leading them, that I will not be able to do because I will be bound by the restrictions that come with being state or board certified. For example, a therapist, a counselor can't speak into the individual across the desk from his life. They can't tell him this is what I think you should do or whatever. They're listeners, you know. They're not really allowed to offer that stuff. And that was one of the things I didn't want to not be able to tell people what I felt like they should do. I didn't want to not be able to guide them or direct them. And so anyway, I didn't pursue a license, but I did graduate the school. And the thing that I agreed with the most was the cognitive behavioral therapy, the fact that thought is behavior. Behavior does starts with a thought. And if you don't change the way you think, then you're not going to change the way you act. I was thinking today about this podcast, and about what I wanted to say about recovery. And um, I'm just about finished with the second book that Nicole and I have been writing together. It's called From Fear to Faith, and it is a book that um, basically identifies everything that, from a faith approach to addiction recovery. But it all starts with one thing, and that is the individual has to believe that they can fully recover from addiction. They have to believe that they can beat addiction permanently. And that is contradictory to what the recovery world teaches today. The clinical and the recovery community believe that addiction does not have a cure, and they believe that you cannot fully overcome it, and that to ever think that you have fully overcome addiction is to become complacent and whatever. And I understand all those things, but I disagree with them. I don't believe that your addiction was your choice, but at the same time, I do believe that it was brought on by a choice.
Mm.
I believe that it happened because you chose to use drugs, and that addiction continued because you continued to use drugs. I was completely bound by addiction, and I was an addict. And there was a significant amount of time in my early recovery where I still had those urges and those desires, and every time something would happen, I would want to get high. And that's normal. But the day and the time where I realized that I had gone through all sorts of different stuff and never thought about using, from that point forward, I'm not going to refer to myself as an addict anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any of the stuff that defined as an addiction.
Mm.
That none of those symptoms are there anymore. There's a group of people out there that think 100% of everything an addict ever brought on themselves in their life, including or that had anything to do with their addiction, is the addict's fault. It's all on the addict. They could have avoided situations. They could have avoided abuse. They could have avoided, they could have walked out. They could have done this and that. They put every bit of it on the addict's shoulders, and it's all the addict's fault, and they don't have any tolerance for anything, and blah, blah, blah. Those people exist. But on the very opposite end of that spectrum is today's recovery industry that has literally taken almost everything off of the addict's shoulders, and they have made the addict a victim in every situation. It's not
Mm.
your fault you were abused. It's not your fault you were divorced. It's not your fault you lost jobs. It's not your fault. Nothing's your fault. It's not your choice. You have no choice in it. And what everybody needs to understand is that the way that recovery is done today, the way the mainstream recovery beliefs today, they are the opposite end of that spectrum. They're not in the middle anywhere. They're as far liberal now with their beliefs of recovery
Mm.
as the other side is in their beliefs, thinking that it's all the addict's fault.
Yeah.
And where I try to strive for is somewhere in the middle. Because what we need to understand is that when you take all the responsibility from the addict and you tell him this ain't your fault, addiction's not your fault, it's nothing was a choice, it's all you victim, 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 victim. Man, you have to have been an addict like I was. And you have to understand how this mind right here is looking for every excuse it can find. Every excuse it can find to use, every
Mm.
excuse it can find to defend being an addict, every excuse it can find to stay in that mindset or that life. An addict is looking for that actively.
Is where can people find you?
Facebook, Brandon Chatagnier on Facebook. I don't really have TikTok. You can find out stuff through my wife's TikTok. Um, Anybody that needs help, you can message on Facebook. We do whatever we can to help people. We have resources that can get people transferred here to Alexandria.
Mm.
We have a recovery program that we run. I have a home that we house people in. We're working towards a long-term rehab that Nicole and I are planning to open, and it's all strictly faith-based. We believe that people can fully overcome addiction and move on to a new life. Nicole
Mm.
and I have no intentions whatsoever of trying to lead people into recovery. There's
Mm.
plenty of places out there for that. Our intention is to lead you through it. Our
Mm.
intentions is for you to come into recovery knowing that one day recovery can end. Recovery is a process just like your addiction was. We believe that as long as you're still visiting your addiction every day or every week, you're sitting in circles and whatnot forever, you're still in that addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you can relapse into that addiction because you're still in that addiction. But we want to lead people out of it, out of the
Awesome.
life of addiction and out of the life of recovery to a place where they're completely different, a new person altogether. And
Hmm.
so Brandon Chatagnier on Facebook, or you can find Nicole through
Yeah.
Nicole Victorious. New
I
book will be
will
coming out soon.
I will put a link to you on Facebook in the show notes. Brandon, thanks so much for joining me today. That's a wild story you got, brother. I'm glad you found your way out the other side. I'm glad you're using your experiences to help others. But we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Take care,
All
my
right,
friend.
man. Thank you. You too.
Okay. If you got something out of that, please give that like button a click. If you're not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. That's all I got for you today. Take care, everyone.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.